All right, welcome everyone to our webinar today through Chesapeake Conservancy, through our webinar series, Everglades of the North, Protecting the Nanticoke River Watershed. We're so glad you can join us to learn a little more about some of our conservation efforts, particularly on the Eastern Shore. Every land deal is a little different, and so hopefully you'll get a little insight into what we're doing. We have our panelists here queued up, ready to speak with you, and there'll be a Q&A session at the end. So during the time, you can go right ahead and put your question into the Q&A box, and we'll hopefully get around to you at the very end to get things started. Again, my name is JT Dean. I'm Director of Individual Giving at Chesapeake Conservancy. For those who may not be as familiar with Chesapeake Conservancy, we are the only watershed-wide organization focused on both land conservation and stream restoration to achieve a healthier Chesapeake Bay. We're using and sharing the latest groundbreaking data and technology, including artificial intelligence, to determine where to focus conservation efforts to have the most impact using the least amount of resources. So we do our programs through three pillars, through land conservation, stream restoration, and data science, tying them all together in each project with our partners to help get great results for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So before we get into our main feature, I wanted to introduce you to someone very special, our new CEO, Susan Shingledecker. Susan just started a few months ago and has been here before as our former vice president of programs. So I know Susan would like to introduce herself and say a few words. So go ahead, Susan.
Thank you so much, JT. Welcome to all of you. It is great to see so many people online today interested to learn more about the Chesapeake Conservancy and the incredible Nanticoke watershed. As JT mentioned, I am Chesapeake Conservancy's CEO. I returned to Chesapeake Conservancy in early September, and it is an honor and a privilege to lead this incredible team. I originally started with Chesapeake Conservancy back in 2017. And in 2020, I had the opportunity to step away and lead my own organization, an organization that was focused on earth science data, everything from satellite data and NASA to an individual researcher in a lab at a university and soil data, ocean data, all different kinds of data. So I spent 5 years immersing myself in the world of data. But as I tell people, at the end of the day, data is zeros and ones. And zeros and ones don't love you back in the same way that an incredible ecosystem like the Chesapeake does. I have been rooted in the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem. I've lived in the watershed since 1993. And I realize that I actually have lived in Maryland now longer than any other state. And so it's a place that I really call home. But we know that more than 18 million people living in this watershed, our impacts on the bay are really undeniable. We lose tens of thousands of acres of open space each year. And our own analysis here at Chesapeake Conservancy tells us that we could be losing as much as 37 acres per day. So we know that it is critical that we work to conserve land before it's too late. Restoration is essential and it's a big part of the work that we do, but to keep pace with the development and accounting for the undeniable impacts of climate change on our region, conserving land is one of the greatest tools we have to build a resilient ecosystem. As JT mentioned, at Chesapeake Conservancy, we are thrilled to be the only watershed-wide organization focused on both land conservation and stream restoration. And we do this work through direct programs, dynamic partnerships, and most importantly, as JT mentioned, bringing the latest data and technology to our work. So I invite you to explore our website and to reach out to our staff to learn more about our work in land conservation, stream restoration, and empowering the entire conservation and restoration community with data. But today's webinar, you're going to hear a lot about our land conservation work, specifically here in the Nanticoke River watershed. This is work I was excited to lead and be a part of starting back in 2017. And I can tell you, having grown up on the Great Lakes and then having spent the majority of my time in the watershed on the Western Shore, the Nanticoke watershed is a place really unlike any other. And so I hope that you enjoy today's webinar and that it sparks a curiosity in you to learn more about our work. And with that, I'll turn it back to JT.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Appreciate it. So as I mentioned before, we are doing conservation work throughout the whole Chesapeake Bay watershed. The work on the eastern shore and the Nanticoke is just one small portion, but a very vital portion. Our panelists will go into more details about the Nanticoke, but just to share with you a few facts, the Nanticoke River watershed is over 725,000 acres, including 50,000 acres of wetlands. It includes a migratory waterfowl. In fact, it is supports 35% of all wintering waterfowl using the Atlantic flyway. They've identified over 180 state and global rare species and more than 70 animal species that are considered rare or uncommon in the Nanticoke. It is an absolutely beautiful landscape, and no one cares more about it or knows more about it than our panelist here, Tom Horton, who I will bring on here. And Tom is one of the leading environmentalists in the Chesapeake Bay. He's a journalist and a teacher. He has covered environmental issues for Baltimore Sun. He has authored several books about the Chesapeake Bay and has written in magazines including National Geographic, Rolling Stone, New York Times, and the Boston Globe. He recently retired from teaching and writing environmental studies at Salisbury University, and in addition, he regularly contributes to the Chesapeake Bay Magazine and Bay Journal News. He lives in Salisbury and spends time kayaking and biking and has led many tours for us through the years along the Nanticoke. And so I will toss over to Tom. Go right ahead.
Can you hear me now, JT?
Yep, just fine. Thanks.
Okay, this is hard for me to navigate. I still use floppy disks and something called DOS, which predated Windows. So this is a big technological achievement for me. I began exploring the Nanticoke seriously in Marshy Hope, its main tributary, probably around 1957 when my dad gave me an old rowboat. And, I take students out there, and it would be easy to tell them a kind of when I was your age, paradise lost story. It's actually more complex than that. The river these days looks cleaner than it did when I was a kid because my dad's chicken plant dumped guts and feet and heads in there, and the tomato canneries discharged the Seaford sand and gravel, used to wash their gravel in the creek. So it didn't look as cool as it does now. There was a lot more fish and wildlife generally, although I never saw an eagle growing up. Ospreys were relatively scarce. So not a simple story. I think one of the cooler trips we did several years ago when I was working for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, we took a group of paddlers from Federalsburg down the Marshy Hope, down the whole Nanticoke to the mouth on Tangier Sound. And it was pretty scenic, almost wilderness-like. The banks are pretty well protected, a lot of wooded swamp, a lot of Spartina marshes. And then we put them in a plane and we flew back up over Federalsburg, and you see the watershed, which is agriculture, lots of forest cleared, Sussex County, Delaware, rampant sprawl development. So, two different looks at the same river. The good news is I think looking back at my environmental writing career, which began in 1972, if I had to list some of the more notable environmental successes, it would be land protection. There was nothing but Maryland Environmental Trust in 72. A lot of places didn't even have authorizing language to allow local land trusts to form. So nowadays we've done a much better job of protecting that watershed, which is in need of protecting because the zoning is not that good in the counties like Wycomico and Dorchester and Sussex that include much of the watershed. One thing that I think is worth mentioning, probably 10 years ago, might have been 12, there was a proposal by the Horsey family who operate sand and gravel pits in Delaware to put a huge 24/7, 40-year sand and gravel operation near the mouth of the Marshy Hope and the Nanticoke. Would have been disastrous. We were able to defeat it and defeated it in Dorchester County, where it's not easy to defeat such things. And what I think really turned the corner, even with those commissioners there, was we were able to make a case that by that point, there had been millions and millions of public and private investment in making that river something special, a protected river. And I think that I could see them think, yeah, this has gone pretty far. I felt like, boy, we've really turned a corner. We were able to convince the Dorchester County commissioners that there's been a ton of money and effort put into making this river something special. And this is not a river where you start okaying big sand and gravel operation. So that to me was a really hopeful thing. One other thing, as long as I'm on hope, is, we have discovered in the last 5 or 6 years that the river is the last spawning place for federally endangered Atlantic sturgeon in the entire Maryland Chesapeake, maybe several dozen fish. DNR in Maryland is netting and microchipping them now. They got a 7 foot 9 inch female just full of eggs this September, and she's busy going back out to the continental shelves as we speak. So I don't want to talk forever. I'd be glad to answer questions later, JT, but I think that gives you a little bit of a taste for the river. Oh, I was out there last night. My son called and said, "Do you know a place that's dark enough I could do the northern lights?" And I said, "Yeah, the Nanticoke. It's pretty dark. That's a good thing." So there we were.
Great, Tom. Thank you. I appreciate it. And as Tom mentioned, you'll have a chance to ask him any questions about the Nanticoke and this is beautiful area. As you can see some of these pictures going past here. Whenever kayak there, you see bald eagles flying overhead. And as Tom mentioned, it weren't there necessarily before. And a lot of it's due to all of our joint efforts working together along the Nanticoke on the eastern shore with federal and private partners. And we started working there at Chesapeake Conservancy in 2008. We've protected 26 properties there, totaling 3,661 acres with our partners. And there's a lot that goes into these things. And one of the people who has played a strong hand in that is Ron Vickers. He has been working with us for a long time. Ron is a native Delawarean. He attended University of Delaware, graduating with a degree in etymology and applied ecology. He migrated to the South, received a master's in wildlife ecology from the University of Florida, came back up to Delaware and has worked for 32 years in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, Division of Parks and Recreation. He retired in 2016, but has been very involved with us and our friends on the Eastern Shore since 2019, including when he started on the board of Sussex County Land Trust and many other places. So to talk about what goes into these projects and what Chesapeake Conservancy has been particularly working on, I'm going to toss it over to Ron.
Thank you.
And Ron, do you need, you're going to share your screen or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'm going to share mine if this will come up
right.
okay. But I'd be willing to forfeit my time and let Tom tell a few more stories. I'd be all right with that. Anyway, let me pull this up on mine. It should come up, hopefully. Okay. Whoop. Did you take yours down, JT?
Yep, I'm down.
Okay. Let me try this again then. All right, and let me go back up one. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about doing the deal on protecting the Nanticoke. Tom has lots of good stories and experiences out on the land. I have some different types of experiences in dealing with the landowners. And I know from looking at the folks who are online here that a lot of you as well have experience in dealing with landowners. And as you all can probably say, no land deal is the same. They all have a little different twist to them for various reasons. But what I plan to do is go through some basics of doing the deal and then give you an idea of some things on a couple projects in Delaware and how they related back to the first part of the presentation. But here's a quick shot, if you will, of the Nanticoke River watershed.
I'm sorry, Ron, I'm going to interrupt you right here. I can't see your screen. If you want, I
Okay.
can pull up mine. So just let me know what you prefer.
Well, if you can pull yours up and then
Okay.
I'm not sure why this one's not working, but you need me to come out of mine and then you could come up.
Yep. That should work right now.
All right.
You just tell me when to advance.
Okay. As long as I can do, okay. All right. That's good. What we're looking at here is thanks to the folks at the Conservation Innovation Center at Chesapeake Conservancy. This is a map of the watershed of the Nanticoke River and also part of the Blackwater area. And it's just a quick shot to give you a sense of what is protected on the landscape. Anything that you see in color there, even the faint blue, is protected already. If we can advance to the next one. This is a little closer in. This shows mainly what's on the Delaware side that's protected. Actually, 89,260 acres in the Nanticoke River watershed are protected in Delaware. And you can see the different, these are just state agencies. And you can see the big chunk of that is ag lands preservation. We've had a real strong push in Delaware for that. And a lot of it is in southwestern Kent County and northwestern Sussex County. We'll click ahead. And this is the same watershed view, but also showing lands that are protected in Maryland. And I think the important point is that there's about 163,000 acres protected, and that's about 31% of the River watershed, which is a great number uh, to have protected. I know there's been a lot of talk about trying to protect 30% by 2030. Well, we're already over that here in the Nanticoke River watershed, thanks to a lot of you in this participating in this webinar and also other folks out there doing the deal. Next one, please. I like to characterize doing the deal as three P's: preservation, process, and partners. And we'll advance. Preservation takes a lot of people, time, and funding. It's usually not just one person doing the job. It's a lot of folks involved from various backgrounds and various reasons, and it does take time. If you're extremely lucky, you can have a preservation project that will come about in a short time frame, but most of them do take a lot of time, and of course, funding is key. Okay, what lands get preserved? Well, we can do all kinds of things like analyzing data. As JT mentioned, part of the focus of Chesapeake Conservancy is the Conservation Center, where they look at soils, topography, habitat, all those different features, ownership patterns, and you can look at trying to preserve property to expand existing protected lands or make wildlife corridor connections. Sometimes you may have standalone sites that you want to protect for specific species or habitats, or maintain viewsheds, like along the Nanticoke, which is very important in maintaining that viewshed, basically what John Smith saw when he was coming up in the 1607-08 time frame. Sometimes opportunities walk in the door. You have landowner desires, and I have landowner in quotes there because through the years I've had lots of situations where someone sort of represents their landowner, but they aren't. They may want their neighbor's property protected. They may want to try to sell us land that we already own or have protected already. In some cases, it's one of multiple family members that wants to do the deal. and the other members don't want to. So sometimes those opportunities work out, and sometimes they're a little bit of a puzzle. Also, for preservation, and what we're talking about is either fee simple or conservation easement. Fee simple, of course, is where you purchase the fair market value at fair market value the property, and conservation easement is where the landowner still owns the land and you place an easement on it, essentially purchasing the development rights. And there's some details on that, but I won't go into that at this point. Okay, next, please. The second P is process. And all of these things take time again, and money, and also people. Appraisal, you use a little bit different appraiser in land protection than you do, say, in a straight up real estate or buying a house kind of situation. Usually we're looking at appraisers that are qualified under the MAI as a member of the Appraisal Institute or the SREA. Beyond that, they look at highest and best use, of course, comparable sales, they do adjustments, and they come up with a fair market value. Your environmental assessment, uh, again, you typically would use an outside environmental firm. EC or REC is recognized environmental concern. So phase one assessment, the company is looking for any kind of RECs. Those could be drums on the site, oil stains. They look at historical data. If there was something that was found there a number of years ago, regulatory information, there may be some new regulations out that affect what you can and can't do on the landscape or what has happened on the landscape. And if you come across RECs, then you may have to enter into a phase two assessment, which again is a little more time and money to get that squared away to find out what's going on site. Survey, I'd say here, record the plot because I used to have a survey crew that I dealt with with the state of Delaware, and they would kind of shake their heads when I would come in because invariably the preservation land that I was working on had not been surveyed either in a long time or it involved wetlands or unshore boundaries. A lot of times in doing your work, you find old descriptions of go to the fence post and the third big old white oak tree down at the corner, and then you turn left. Well, that doesn't always work very well when you're trying to do an actual survey and make sure that you have the proper property that you're protecting. Anyway, so if you do get involved, please, please, please record your surveys so the next person coming along can base their work off of that. Next one, please. Thank you. And contract. And these are pretty standard things. You come up with a price and payment schedule and doing the deal. You may do something like multi-year payouts, or you may do some special things like life estate, where the landowner may stay on the property for X number of years. Contingent on funding. Definitely put in your contract that this deal is contingent on getting your funding. Um, Settlement costs, you make sure everybody understands up front who's paying for what. Sometimes, typically, the buyer might pay for doing the deed, or sometimes the seller pays for doing the deed, or you use it as an incentive, or you may be near the end of a tax year, and in that standpoint, then you would look at, well, to make this deal happen, I'll cover last year's taxes. We're pretty close to the end of the year, and we'll pick up next year's too. So there's some specific issues that pop up from time to time. Inspections or loss, you have to be sure that you have a paragraph in there related to that, because if you're buying, we'll say, 100 acres of woods, and you have something that happens, we'll say a tornado comes through and blows down 25 acres, then you have the right to go back and look at that, and you might have to potentially adjust your purchase price based on the loss of the natural resources, or if it's a historic structure, or if it gets damaged in a storm. So you have to make sure that you can go in after something happens and you can deal with inspections and loss before you settle. Amendments allow for changes. Lots of times the funding may not come through as anticipated, so you have to extend the settlement date. Title, chain of ownership, make sure that you're dealing with the landowner. Uh, that's come up a few times, like I said, where You're not really dealing with the landowner, and you need to make sure that it is the person that owns the property. You may find out through your title work that there are existing restrictions. There may be easements, power line easements, road right-of-ways, reserved right-of-ways that haven't been used yet, and then all of a sudden somebody's coming through and put a utility line through the property. Oh, well, okay, that's an existing restriction, but now it's going in. Estate issues. Sometimes, if you're dealing with multiple landowners and they're passing property on into to different generations, you have to make sure that it is cleared through the estate and everything is correct. We have had one project I'll talk about later that straddled the state line, and one side, the estate was closed and it was fine. The other side, at settlement, we found out that it needed to be closed and we had to deal with that. That was a little bit of a delay. Closing and deed, pretty standard. Your HUD-1 is your settlement sheet. And again, you restate what was in the contract to make sure, again, everyone's on the right page as to who gets what money. And you let the buyers, or excuse me, you let the sellers review that beforehand so everybody knows. And you may have special things in the deed that survive settlement. If you name a property after someone or the landowner has reserved hunting rights, you need to make sure at times that those things are maintained in the deed as well. Next one. The next P is partners. These are pretty obvious, I think. You sometimes have partners. You have governmental partners, obviously federal, state, county, and local. Nonprofit organizations like Chesapeake Conservancy is a great partner in the Nanticoke area. They get a lot of deals started. They advocate for projects, and they also help in the funding process. Sometimes you have a public constituency as a partner. They may support a specific property. Typically, this may come about. I'm not thinking of a NIMBY situation necessarily, not in my backyard, but sometimes you have a constituency for a specific property. It may be an historic site. It could be a cultural resource of concern or property that's always been on the landscape that the general public wants to see protected. So they can be an important partner as well. And of course, you have funding partners. I highlight two here. There are many, of course, but the U.S. Navy REPI program, some of you probably are very familiar with this, but that's the Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program. In this area, the Patuxent Naval Air Station is on the west side of the bay, and what they do is they work with us to maintain the flight area, the flight path for them to continue to do their research and test different types of Navy vehicles and so forth. So they fly up the Nanticoke all the way almost to Seaford. And also, what they look to do is to maintain the military readiness, but also they have included an environmental protection side of things. So they come in as a funding partner, and they will share funding for a conservation easement or potentially part of the purchase price, as long as they can help maintain that open airspace and there's not a lot of development underneath of it. And a second major funder, of course, is Mount Cuba Center, and you'll hear from Jeff a little bit here in a few minutes. Mount Cuba has been a major player in the watershed, working to help protect lots of properties. Next slide, please. They have helped protect about 25 properties. And I know this slide is a little tough to see, but the idea is that they're scattered through the landscape in Maryland and in Delaware. And over the past 10 to 15 years, they've helped protect 25 sites and almost 3,500 acres. And we greatly appreciate their continued support and protection here. Next one, please. Okay, I had three P's. Now I got three more letters. These are my last letters, I promise. TLC. Yes, tender loving care does matter, but I'm talking about trust, listen, and connection. Be honest. Don't make up answers when you're talking with the landowners, because invariably you will be found out, and that is not good. That can spoil the preservation deal, and that may poison the waters for many years. So be honest. Don't make up any answers for questions. If you don't know, say so, and say you'll find out. and come back to the person. Provide realistic timelines. If you know ahead of time that you have the money in hand and you can do things, well, that's fine. But if you don't know where your funding is coming from, be realistic and let them know that it may take some time. We have to go through process X, Y, and Z, and this is what we're looking at. Because you need to have that trust with the landowner. Listen, don't assume you know more about the property than the landowner. We go into situations, or I like to, where I know as much, try to find out as much as I can about the property, but I do not assume that I know more than the person who owns it, who's walked it a lot, who's lived on it, who's camped on it, whatever it may be. Uh, Listen, and you'll find out some things. And that may also influence how you do the deal. And you let the story unfold. Let the landowners, let them tell the story. You can join in, obviously, but let it unfold. And connection. Make that connection with the person, with the landowner. You can do that through, you may have a person in common that you know, you may have an interest in common, or maybe it's the location in common. I grew up in Sussex County and did work throughout the state of Delaware, but when I worked in Sussex County, invariably I had some kind of connection with people, either through where I went to school or our cousins or whatever. I would go back to my main office in Dover and people say, you must be related to everybody in Sussex County. Well, not exactly, but you make the connection and you get that connection with the landowner and it builds up that trust again as well. So TLC takes time and patience. Next one, please. Okay, couple quick projects, and you can see how these relate back to the 3Ps and the TLC. This is the Woodland Ferry crossing from the Seaford side to, excuse me, crossing from the Laurel side to the Seaford side of the Nanticoke River. The Nanticoke Ferry has been running and in existence since the 1740s. It's an historic crossing of the waterway. Go to the next one. We were involved with a project in this area near Woodland. A lot of nice emergent vegetation along the river. We had some spatterdock, and we even had some wild stands of rice mixed in, along with some cattail and so forth. Across the river is protected land, the forested area, that's Fish and Wildlife property, Delaware Fish and Wildlife. Next, please. And also there was a lagoon that was cut in on this property. This lagoon was put in pre-regulation back before the 1970s. And you can see in the background there are some large trees, but there was also a mobile home park on this property. Next one, please. And it has its own wildlife. A nice little flock of turkeys that were using the sand road that winds its way through a wooded area on this property. And the next one, please. Okay, this was called Absher Farms LLC. It's now called Nanticoke Crossing Park. But first, I wanted to highlight what you see in green here is protected land already. It's almost all of this is Delaware Division of Fish and Wildlife property, part of the Nanticoke Wildlife Area. There's a large chunk of woodlands there between the green and the purple in that one area. We'd like to see that protected, hopefully, make that connection. But we had an opportunity to come up to deal with this property. Next slide, please, in purple. And the large property you see was about 11 acres, and it was 29 mobile home park. 29 mobile homes were in that area. When we became involved in this in 2019, there were only 7 mobile homes left. Most of the others had been moved off or had been removed and destroyed, but it still had its issues. But Mr. Absher was looking at selling the property or developing it. He also picked up the adjacent property, which you see is a 31 lot approved but unimproved woodland. So we had the opportunity here for about 40 acres to protect. And we had a lot of interesting things that happened. I'd mentioned trust earlier. The first time that I met Mr. Absher, it was a good meeting, a brief meeting, and said, "I'll, okay, we'll continue this conversation, and I'll meet you in a couple weeks and come back with some proposals." And I remember we met in the Burger King in Georgetown, and we were sitting there. I was going through. He had a copy of what I was talking about, and then all of a sudden, I saw him. He kind of looked at me, and he put on these reflecting sunglasses, and he just stared at me. It felt like, 5 minutes, but I'm sure it was probably just 30 seconds, but he just stared at me. And he basically, I think, was trying to see if he could trust what I was saying. If we really were serious about buying all this property, if we were serious about bringing the funding to the table and make this happen. Because he had the opportunity, he was sort of in the building business himself, that he could have gone ahead and developed everything here. He had the approvals for the subdivision, and he could either subdivide the mobile home park if he wanted to or not. But it was one of those moments where, okay, is this going to go south or not? But fortunately, he then took his sunglasses down and said, "Okay, I believe you. I think we're okay." So from there, we went forward and we did the deal. It did involve a few other twists as well. This also happened right about the time the pandemic was in play. He had 7 mobile homes still on the property, and he was planning to sell those homes and buy out the leases, but he could not do that because there was a moratorium on rental units, if you remember, during that time. So we had to wait till the pandemic moratorium was raised, and we also had to raise all the funding. Again, we had some partial funding, but it took time to raise the rest of the money. So, and also there was some cleanup that needed to take place, obviously, with removal of the mobile homes, and there were some old areas that had been used for landscape dumping and so forth. So we worked all through those things. I'll go to the next slide. And this is what we ended up with. It's now called Nanticoke Crossing Park, and it conserved about 40 acres of woods, and it provides recreation opportunities. We're in the process of making a small watercraft launch. There are trails being put in and potential little pier for fishing and so forth. Protects over 1,900 feet of the shoreline with 600 feet of straight line. And it provides public access to the Captain John Smith National Heritage Trail, which is, uh, some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with that. It's basically a water-based trail along the Nanticoke and out into the major tributaries that John Smith explored in his day. And it's part of the Middle Chesapeake Sentinel landscape. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Interior, and U.S. Defense Department combine to protect working lands, preserve properties, and maintain military readiness. And they've named the Middle Chesapeake as a sentinel landscape where they're working to do that. So we were able to protect this area as part of it. And it buffers woodland fairy, as I mentioned. Now the Sussex County Land Trust, which is a nonprofit organization that works throughout Sussex County, owns and manages the site for public use. And partners. As I mentioned earlier, we need partners, and these are the ones we had on this. Chesapeake Conservancy, Mount Cuba Center, Sussex County Council. They were very interested in this project, and also they have 2 county council representatives that sit on the board of the Sussex County Land Trust. So that helps as well. And then Navy REPI funds and Delaware Open Space Program funds. Okay, next one. All right, the next one real quickly. This is the north side, or I call it the north side of the Nanticoke, the Seaford side. And the white sign out in the river there is approximately where the Maryland-Delaware line is located. So you have a wooded frontage along the river. Next slide, please. And this is Wright Creek, Wright, named after a longtime landowner in the area that wanders uh, originates up in Sussex County and wanders down and comes out near the state line. Next slide. And this property also had an old field, a meadow area that will probably undergo some meadow rehabilitation and pollinators and so forth. And it had a mature forest in the background. Next slide. And it had an old dirt road that wanders through the trees. It parallels the creek. Next, please. And this is Wright Creek again. Okay, well, this one, next slide, please. As I said, straddles the Maryland-Delaware line. That's the dash line running north-south, and is showing again what is protected. Gotcha. The protected lands are in green, and the yellow is the Porter Bertel property. Okay, next one. And Porter Bertel is, like I said, the yellow, and it's split by the state line. Um, what happened was Mr. Porter, the grandfather, bought property in the 1950s in this area. And basically, he was working off an old 1854 deed, another issue. And it said 200 acres. And it gave a somewhat okay description. But part of this project was a lot of survey time, a lot of cost in trying to figure out how his 200 acres fit into all this. Anyway, we ended up that the property was passed from the grandfather to he had two children, uh, a son and a daughter. The son received the black rectangle below the road, and the daughter received the sort of trapezoid shaped above it. And then that passed on to the kids, so that there were two Porter uh, family members and six Bertel family members. And this had been a project that had been on uh, Fish and Wildlife's radar screen for a long time, and also the Nanticoke River Watershed Conservancy, which again is another nonprofit that deals with protecting lands in the watershed. And they had been trying to protect this for 20 plus years, 25 years almost. There were estate issues and family member issues and so forth, but it kind of went back and forth. I had to do a little shuttle diplomacy here where some of the family members did not want to be in the same room with others. In some cases, some family members wanted to sell their in-holding to the north, but the only way you could get there was through creating an access easement from the Maryland side. Anyway, it was one of those projects that went on and on. It took a little bit longer than anticipated. Chesapeake Conservancy with support from Mount Cuba Center funds and with the Chesapeake Saving Special Places funds came in, and we were able to buy all the Porter Bertel lands up front, as well as the rectangle to the south of the road. And eventually, then what we did was we sold the Maryland side to Maryland DNR Forestry. So now it's part of the Chesapeake Forest property. And the Delaware side went to the Nanticoke River Watershed Conservancy. So they now own it. Thrown in the mix, and I'll wrap this up, was also a demolition project on the Dorchester County side, which was an interesting process in and of itself. Getting the right permits, getting the right approvals to work this, but we took out almost 12 30 cubic yard dumpster material off of that site. Anyway, all right, last slide. Next to last, excuse me. This is what Henry Porter ended up being. And we, as one of the situations in the contract, indeed, it is now called the Henry F. Porter Preserve, particularly on the Delaware side. It's called the Porter Tract for the Maryland DNR side. So it's 182 acres. It's part of 1,000 acres of contiguous protected land on the north side of the Nanticoke. A lot of folks, a lot of you folks on this webinar have been involved with this. It protects 1.36 miles of the creek, again, the Sentinel landscape, and there were two Mason-Dixon markers that were originally set in the 1760s that were on the boundary line between Delaware and Maryland. One original one was still there. One closest to the river has sunk in the mud, and the replacement sunk in the mud, and the third one sunk in the mud. So someday we may be able to find that. Don't know. Nanticoke River Watershed Conservancy owns that side. Maryland DNR, the Maryland side. Again, partners, Chesapeake Conservancy, Mount Cuba Center, Navy, Open Space, Nanticoke River Watershed Conservancy, and Maryland DNR. Last slide. I like to end with some things. People say, oh, about the source of funds and all. And they say, oh, that's tainted money. I'd say, taint enough. We will look for funding and use funding for preservation and hopefully not have any problems with that, but we're looking for money from wherever sources we can find it. Do your giving while you're living so you'll be knowing where it's going. And with land conservation, you're in it for the long haul. You may end up protecting the property, but then there are the management issues. That's the long haul. To maintain it, to protect it, to deal with all kinds of things. I like to think that people need a place to live, to work, and to play. And I always characterize the work that I did. I was trying to protect the play spots. Sometimes knowing a place is preserved is good enough, and you don't always have to see it in person. And I think this is important when you talk about preservation to folks who don't deal with it on a day-to-day basis. If you think about the national parks, you may not necessarily get to visit any of them, some of them, all of them, but knowing they're there, I think, is something that's important. They're protected and they're preserved. And actually, my wife found this last quote, came across it from Abraham Lincoln. Laws change, people die, the land remains. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ron. I appreciate it. Now to introduce our final speaker, I'm going to introduce Randy Larimore, Chairman Emeritus of Chesapeake Conservancy's board, and who's cared about the Chesapeake and especially the Nanticoke, and has been very integral in these projects. So, Randy, want to jump ahead? I'm going to actually change around your video here.
Can you hear me?
Yep, just fine.
Great. Thanks, JT. I grew up in Seaford, Delaware, which is near the headwaters. Are you getting an echo? I'm sorry. Are you getting an echo?
You should be okay.
Which is near the headwaters of the Nanticoke River, and it's the largest city on the river. As children, we fished and boated on the Nanticoke, but as Tom said, the river was too dirty for swimming. My father was mayor of Seaford in 1955 and helped build a water treatment plant, so now the river is clean and safe for swimming. It was fun living in Seaford and learning about its history. Oysters brought prosperity to the town in the late 1800s. In 1856, a rail line was extended to Seaford and made it the center for shipping produce and oysters to Wilmington and Philadelphia. During oyster season, it is said you could walk across the river on the boats lined up to offload their oysters. Seaford also served as a way stop for Harriet Tubman as she helped a young slave named Tilly escape to northern Delaware. In 2018, the Chesapeake Conservancy, along with supporters such as Mount Cuba Center, bought a piece of land along Nanticoke to become a park for the city of Seaford and gave residents access to the river. We installed a living shoreline and a walkway along the river where people could fish and enjoy the river. Of course, the park is named the Oyster House Park. One of our very generous supporters for several years has been the Mount Cuba Center. We have worked closely with them to protect the Nanticoke Watershed. I'd now like to introduce Jeff Downing, who is an experienced leader in the botanical and educational sectors and has served as the executive director of Mount Cuba Center since December 2012. Previously, Jeff held multiple positions at the New York Botanical Garden for over a decade. Located in Hockessin, Delaware, the mission of the Mount Cuba Center is to inspire an appreciation for the beauty and value of native plants and a commitment to protect the habitats that sustain them. The center cultivates over 1,000 acres of gardens and natural lands that are a must-see. To date, Mount Cuba has protected over 15,000 acres of land in the Mid-Atlantic region, including the lands that became Delaware's first state national historic park. Jeff, please tell us about the Mount Cuba Center.
Well, thank you, Randy. I appreciate the warm introduction. Much appreciated. And I'm happy to be here with Chesapeake Conservancy. I am Jeff Downing, Executive Director of Mount Cuba, and we are proud of our partnership with Chesapeake Conservancy to conserve open space in the Nanticoke River watershed. Mount Cuba Center is a botanical garden in Hockessin, Delaware, as Randy mentioned. We are dedicated to horticultural display, research, and education that's focused on native plants and ecological gardening. Our goal is to acquaint people with the beauty and value of native plants and to motivate a community of action to accelerate the transformation of America's landscaping default to one that is more native and ecologically based. Can you see my screen, by the way?
Yep, I can see just fine.
Okay, good. Now if I could just make it advance. Is it advancing? No?
No, if you go to the main document, click on that.
You know what? I'm going to do it without slides. That's a beautiful slide. We can live with that. At the same time, Mount Cuba has an enduring commitment to land conservation that was inspired by our founders' legacy. Mount Cuba began as the family home of Lamont and Pamela Copeland and their family. The Copelands, which are a branch of the DuPont family, purchased a fallow hilltop cornfield in 1935 and set about to build a life there. Before the house was completed in 1937, trees and shrubs were already being planted and the barren hilltop began to come to life. Today, Mount Cuba's landscapes are vibrant and lush. We often hear the story of humans and nature as one where nature was beautiful and then humans showed up and it all went to hell. The history of Mount Cuba shows that with the right intention, humans' interactions with nature can instead be beautiful and profoundly beneficial. In 1962, the Copelands, in partnership with their neighbor, Henry B. DuPont Jr., purchased 500 acres of historic farmland near their homes in the rural hills outside of Wilmington to protect it from sprawling development. They called the property Red Clay Reservation after the Red Clay Creek that runs through it and formed a foundation to fund its maintenance. Red Clay Reservation represented the Copelands' first foray into open space conservation. In 2018, Red Clay Reservation merged with Mount Cuba Center to form a combined 1,100 acres of conserved land in northern Delaware. Although the Copelands have passed on, their commitment to preservation continues to guide us. Since 2005, Mount Cuba has provided more than $100 million in grants to protect open space. We helped establish Delaware's first national park and contributed to conserving significant landscapes, including the 500-acre Grenoble property. In total, we've helped preserve, as Randy said, over 15,000 acres of land within a 100-mile radius of Mount Cuba. Some of the most rewarding and valuable of these conservation efforts have been Mount Cuba's work with the Chesapeake Conservancy to protect open space in the Nanticoke River watershed. As we've heard today, the Nanticoke is a pristine and biodiverse resource that provides habitat to hundreds of plant and animal species and is an important rest stop along the Atlantic Migratory Flyway. Preserving these invaluable natural oases is central to Mount Cuba's mission. The progress in the Nanticoke would not have been possible without the Chesapeake Conservancy. Since 2013, we have worked together to conserve more than 3,600 acres in and around the watershed. And while I say together, it's truly the Conservancy who have been in the trenches every day, identifying the properties, working with the landowners, navigating funding sources, and managing the countless details that turn conservation vision into conservation reality. Mount Cuba is proud to support and stand behind their hardworking and creative team. Together, the Chesapeake Conservancy and Mount Cuba are proving true what Lamont and Pamela Copeland believed, that with the right intention, humans' interactions with nature can be beautiful and profoundly beneficial. So I just want to say thank you to the Chesapeake Conservancy staff, its wonderful new leader, and for your partnership and your ongoing commitment to conserving the natural spaces that sustain us all. So thank you. Wonderful to be here. Thanks.
Jeff, thank you so much. And going hand in hand, we're grateful for Mount Cuba for the support that you've given for these projects, the dedication of the entire Mount Cuba board. And you're an inspiration to a lot of the efforts that are going on here. And we're hopeful that others can help do the same thing and contribute in their own way to these efforts. So we're going to wrap up here in a minute, and I apologize also. Just I want to be cognizant of the time of our panelists, but we are going to cut off the Q&A. However, if you have any questions moving forward, I'll be sending out a follow-up email, and feel free to send the questions my way, and I can run them by the panelists and get an answer for you. We're so happy that you joined here to learn more about our work in the Nanticoke, but also how we go about doing conservation. This work also doesn't happen without partners and without people like you to help make that happen and support our efforts. I know the end of year is coming up in Giving Tuesday, and so I hope you would consider Chesapeake Conservancy in your philanthropic plans to help make that happen. It's not easy in conservation right now, and there's always challenges that pop up, but to have the people like you who care so much about the land and want to preserve it and to pass off to other generations so others can enjoy and wildlife can thrive makes it that much more possible. If you have any other questions about the work that we're doing, I refer you to our YouTube page, which also has other webinars that we've done and talk about other conservation projects, or follow our website or us on social media. Thank you so much once again, and I will hopefully see you at our next webinar. Take care, everyone.